Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Change Management, Working and Living in Times of Change. My name is Lindsay Diamond. My pronouns are she and her. I work in the Alumni Relations Office here at Mohawk College. I'm so glad you're able to join us today, and I look forward to learning aside everyone. Today, we're going to be learning about the fundamentals of change and transition, providing practical skills and strategies for managing and coping in change. We will gain a deeper understanding of the change process and how to intentionally respond to working and living in continuous change. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Laura Cole is an executive coach and corporate trainer supporting teams and leaders in change management and conflict resolution. With an MBA in innovation and over 20 years of corporate experience, she brings a combination of theory and practical experience to her workshops and webinars. Laura is the founder of Your Latitude and a business professor here at Mohawk. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Laura, and I hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Glad to be here. Love talking about change. It's one of those topics that on first glance, when we think about change management, we often get this anxiety feeling attached to it. Oh goodness, change management. My hope always is to bring a fresh perspective on what change is, the process of change. And if we can identify ourself in the change process, it then creates a lot of opportunity for how do we function in that change. So I'm really looking forward to sharing two key strategies on understanding the process of change. And then the final thing I'm really looking forward to sharing is this idea of that continuous change. That is it an expectation of us that at some point, if we say this to ourselves, oh, if I can just get through to whatever, then I'll feel so much better. The change will feel better. And we want to look at this concept called VUCA and whether or not, if we were to have a different relationship with change, what difference might that make for us as we go through that? And so much about the change process is our mindsets. It's our relationship to what's happening. And I think these three different things we're going to look at help give us that opportunity to really cultivate a healthy relationship to the change, even if I didn't ask for the change, and even if I don't agree with the change. And those are two very, very important parts of change management. And so we're going to pull those concepts in as we look at these strategies. So I'll share my screen now so we can have a look at what we're talking about here and some of the supports that we can create for ourselves. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is Bridges' transition model. And what you see on the screen here is that Bridges talks about change in three key ways. This idea of letting go. So there's this something that has been in our constant, been part of our current reality, and it's now being removed. And then it's being replaced by the new beginning. So that's referenced by Bridges here with the blue square and then the green circle. Having to let go of the blue square and then having to embrace this new green circle. But this part in the middle, neutral zone, doesn't that just look tidy? Doesn't that just look like, oh, great, I'll just let go of the blue, travel along this perfect arrow, and then embrace this new beginning? And that is not at all what change looks like, does it? It doesn't even feel like that. If only. We actually know that it looks much more like this. So that middle part, the neutral zone, this is often where we find ourselves. And this is that messy, heavy, sometimes feeling when we're experiencing change, especially when we didn't ask for it and we don't agree with it. What happens to us in that journey, on that path? And take a look for just a second at those swirls, because some of them are actually by design there. At first it was just a random, here's what my mouse on my computer wants to do. But then when you actually look at it, there's times when there's massive drops. There's times in this neutral zone where I actually go backwards. I thought I was traveling this way and now I find myself going backwards. There's times when there's long roads up, hard climbs, but wow, I'm headed in the right direction. And so there's all of these things that are happening in that neutral zone. And we want to figure out, what can I do intentionally while I'm in the neutral zone to help me when there's those massive drops, to help me when I find myself, I thought I was moving ahead and I'm feeling like I've gone backwards. What do I do there? And then there's two other key parts of this model that really help us figure out, what is this change process? And I've marked them here. The slide is about to get a bunch more things on it, and then we're going to walk through it. So here come a bunch more things to notice about this model. Okay, boom. That looks a little messier, right? That feels a little more like actual change. And so here's some key things that are taking place. And what we want to, the value we want to take out of understanding this model is that this is all happening. It is this messy. And so when you feel messy in change, it's not because you're not prepared for it. And it's not because you don't have the right skill sets or mindsets to manage the change. Change does feel messy. We can improve on that with these types of conversations. But that, please, like, the last thing we want to take away for ourselves is that if only I had have been more prepared, or if only I could have managed that better. That's not the case. This is what change looks like, and we actually want to become comfortable with the messy and what a difference that can make for us. So there's a couple key things to look at here. The first one is on this left-hand side, the burgundy circle, that is identifying that space where we've let go of the past. Wow, right? There's a whole point on this change process where we physically have to mentally let go of the past. And then we start our journey through the neutral zone. And then I've marked some of these key parts on the neutral zone that could be really, really important conversations to have with yourself as you're feeling these ups and downs. And we're going to talk about that. And then this other part here, this other burgundy circle over here, representing that key part where we then accept the new beginning. And this, the whole transition process could take a very long time. And you'll notice along the bottom there, it's when we start noticing that the old is breaking down and we start to allow some of that new into our conversations, into our actions, into our daily habits, that we notice we're moving towards that new beginning, until finally, as we get further through the neutral zone, we notice that we are seeing more of the new beginning and less of the old. But that part of that old is still there. So this is one of those key things to think about in the neutral zone. In change management, we often focus on what is changing, what I've lost, what is gone. What difference would it make if we also notice the things that aren't changing, that I haven't lost, that are still there, or that are now even better because the change is taking place? And that's not rose-colored glasses thinking. It's a fundamental look at our current reality, and that mindset of, I don't want to just be blinded by my loss. What if there are still things that are not changing? And that's why that last circle, as we move through the neutral zone and head up to that new beginning, still has a little bit of the blue sticking out. Because quite often, if we intentionally ask ourselves that question, as we're heading into that new beginning, if I accept this new beginning, what am I also bringing with me? And there can be some very, very supportive conversations to have there to say, yeah, I'm also bringing this. And it's sometimes hard to see, especially when the change is outside of our control. If we're talking about a workplace and there's changes happening at a strategic leadership level, and we are an employee or manager at that workplace, and we simply have to get on board with the change, it can sometimes be really hard to notice the things that aren't changing. But there's typically something, and what difference would it make for you if you're able to identify that? And so all through the neutral zone, we have those opportunities to think about, how am I going to really embrace this new beginning, especially if I didn't ask for it and I don't agree with it. And so I want to share with you another model that actually works very nicely together with Bridges' model. That gives us some opportunities to think about that. What are those things I can actually do? What are the conversations I want to have? What are some actions I can do through the neutral zone that can help me move towards the new beginning? And so I'm going to share that with you now, and then we can kind of combine the two if we want to spend a bit of time there before we head into VUCA. So let's look at this other model. It's called the TheblerRoss transition curve. And if you've noticed in the top left-hand corner there, I've popped up Bridges' model so that we can keep in our mind, where are we right now as we're going through this transition curve and we're looking at ways to support ourselves. Let's remember where we are in the change process. We're in that very messy neutral zone area. And you might be curious why Bridges calls it the neutral zone when it feels so non-neutral. Doesn't it feel like it's super heavy? Like, neutral zone, that's a weird name. I'll tell you why he called it that. So it's actually a really neat story. So if you think about a trapeze artist at the circus, and those are the ones that fly in the sky above everybody at the circus, and they let go of the one rope and then they reach, grab the other one and like swing back and forth. If you actually watch them, there's a point in time when they have let go of the one rope and they're reaching for the other one, but there's a point in time when they're holding on to nothing. And when you talk to those trapeze artists and the circus performers, they'll tell you that moment just becomes very still, and there's a nothingness about that moment where they've let go and then they're not holding. And Bridges heard this story and felt like that was a similar feeling, that when we've let go of the old, but we haven't committed to that new yet, there's this point in time in the middle where we're not holding on to anything. And there's this feeling of just falling a little bit. And he referred to that as the neutral zone, not because it's a neutral space, but because it's neutral in terms of acceptance. And it was really, it's almost this permission, if you will, that I can let go of the old, even if I'm not ready to accept the new, because there's another space in there, and it's the neutral zone. And so he really wanted to highlight that feeling, because I know for me, I've been in changes before where I'm accepting of the change. I'm accepting that old thing is gone. Okay. But there's something about that new I'm just not quite ready. And then does that mean I have to go back and hang on to the old because I'm not ready for the new? And he really urges no, actually. There is a middle part, and that middle part can be scary, but it can also be a point of there's the change, there's the opportunity to stretch and change, and then take the time you need before you then reach and grab the other one. But obviously the metaphor there is significant because they can't stay like that forever. Boom, right? You crash. And that's significant in change management as well. And that's where this shows up. That's where the TheblerRoss transition curve shows up, is that this idea of being in denial, or this idea of being in resistance, is part of change management and is actually a really important part of change management. It's accepted and we have permission to be there, but that we can't stay there. And if we stay there, that's where we feel stuck. And that's where we start feeling the heaviness of the change, or that's where we start feeling the change that we're experiencing kind of floating in and impacting other parts of our lives. If it's a family change but you're seeing it impacting work, or if it's a work change and then you're starting to see it impact family life. That's typically why we've spent too long hanging and that we need something to grab. And so let's look at TheblerRoss transition curve here and see if we can find places while we're in the neutral zone to create those little strings, if you will, to grab onto. And so TheblerRoss, TheblerRoss is a name, it's a woman, she's a psychologist, and she began her studies in grief. And so if this looks familiar to you, we're going to walk through the steps, but if it looks familiar to you as a grief model, you are correct. That is where she started. She came up with the 5 steps of grief. But then what she noticed over the years was that organizational development people and leaders were actually using her model in the workplace. And so she redesigned it and found this one that works really, really well for change and transition. And isn't that interesting? I find that just so actually supportive to realize that when we go through change, we could actually be feeling levels of grief. And that you'll hear me say these words all the time, what difference would it make? Here's another good example. What difference would it make if we understood that about our own self? That sometimes when we experience change, we experience levels of grief. And what could we do about that? And so she identified 4 levels of transition in the workplace for change management. And she did notice that she still believes we start in denial. So if we're starting up at the left-hand corner of the chart, we'll go down to resistance, across to exploration, and back up to commitment. So she does believe that we typically do go through all 4 stages in our transition or in our neutral zone, but that the amount of time we spend in each quadrant really is individual and really depends on what the change is, our level of acceptance, our level of involvement. It depends on so many things. But that she does suggest that we do a sweep through the whole thing. But that what's significant is that arrow at the bottom in between resistance and exploration. It's like a snakes and ladders style, that it reminds us that there's movement back and forth through the model as well. So let's start at denial and work our way through and see what we think here about this model. What we're looking for in this model is support. What can this model offer us in terms of strategy and support while we're experiencing change? And so the first one there, denial. What I've included in the little boxes is just things you might notice about yourself that might help you know whether or not which category you're in. And the significance of that is because in each different category, you might require different support to help you move through the process. And so in denial, you might find you're withdrawn, you might find that you're looking for blame, you might find that the self-pity piece is really significant in a denial experience. And there is zero judgment attached to any of those words. It's literally a sense and a feeling that you could be experiencing, and that denial is a step, it is a stage, and there's no judgment on whether that's where you are. But what we want to understand is, can I stay there? And this is the part where we struggle, because if we're in the neutral zone, let's remember, if I'm in the neutral zone and the past has been taken away from me, so I might not have even wanted to let go of the past, but it's gone because of change, so it's gone. And I'm in denial about that, but I'm feeling like I'm in a bit of a free fall. What am I reaching for? And can I stay there? And we can't. We need to move. And moving into resistance can sometimes feel like a step backwards, but it's actually not. You are moving forward. And resistance can be a safe place to go from denial. If you just, you're free falling and you have to grab something, so you grab onto the fact, okay, fine, the change is happening, fine, but I don't want it. That's okay. That's okay. You've taken a step. You've moved into resistance. Can you stay in resistance forever? No. But you can take a breath there and you can stop your free fall for a little while, and then you're going to continue to move. But the beautiful part about this curve is that it gives resistance a job. And it gives us actually hope while we're in resistance. We do not have to commit to this change yet if we simply can't, but we've moved out of denial, which is a good step. So in resistance, you could be focused on just the loss. You could have some sabotage conversations, sabotage feelings, blocking or stubbornness with individuals around you. If you're thinking of a workplace conflict, workplace change, that could be with colleagues, especially if your colleague has moved into commitment. If your colleague is further ahead than you and feeling okay about the change, the resistance, you could actually start transferring resistance from the change to the person. And that's an interesting thing to notice. And again, that sounds like a step backwards, doesn't it? It sounds like, oh, why would I want to notice these things about myself? Because something's changing, something's happening, something's moving. And we always want to notice those things in our own transition. Where is my focus right now? And so typically in resistance, your focus is on what you have lost. And so you're still very much looking backwards. So if we were in that neutral zone area in the top left-hand corner, you're still looking back at the blue square and focused on the fact that the blue square is gone. And there's this feeling of sabotage and blocking and sulking from that. And so you'll know that because a lot of your conversations will be centered around, well, we used to be able to, or we could always do, or in the past it's been. A lot of your dialogue and your conversations will be past focused in a negative way. And so here's the beautiful piece about that, is that we are in charge of our transition journey here. And if I've spent a lot of time in resistance and I'm feeling myself in resistance and it doesn't feel good, it's exhausting, and I would like to see what exploration might look like, I want you to look at the words in exploration. Still kind of moody, right? We're still we're not sure, we're not in commitment. We can still be frustrated with this change. We do not have to commit to the change. But the key difference between resistance and exploration is we have now turned our body, and now I'm looking at the green circle. I don't like the green circle. I don't want the green circle, but I can see it. Just put that in your mind for a moment, right? Just put that in your mind for a moment. What difference that could make if now I see it. And I want you to notice these words: inquisitive, information gathering, participative. All of those questions still say you need to understand more. You still have questions you want to ask. You still don't totally get what's going on, but you are now at the very least open to hear more. And that's the key difference between resistance and exploration. Your focus and how you're participating. And I'm going to tell you right now, the difference it has on your mindset and the difference it has on your health is massive. If we can find something that can help us move into that exploration category. And then as we ask questions and as we gather information, depending on how we participate, we can begin accepting pieces of this new change. And then hopefully then we can move up into commitment, where we are forward thinking, focusing on a plan, action oriented. Notice how in exploration it says begin acceptance, but commitment is not called acceptance. Commitment is called commitment. And I want us to appreciate that. That's not just linguistics. That's actually really important. Ask yourself this question: can I commit to a change that I don't like? That's the difference between acceptance and commitment, is that you can. And again, tuck that away and just see what your brain thinks about that. That we can commit to a change that we didn't ask for and we didn't like. And what would that look like? What difference would that make for you if you could find a place for commitment instead of resistance? Resistance can be exhausting, and it's not a long-term solution. That is not to say you need to accept the change. It is to say we need to find places for commitment of action and focus on a plan and forward thinking inside that new green circle. And of course, it's very tricky in public offerings like this to know what's on your mind right now. What change are you picturing for yourself right now? And it could be where right now you're like, oh, wow, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I get that. Or it could be the change that you're thinking about right now is just too large. And the thought of committing to it without acceptance does not make sense to you right now. And I want to acknowledge that there is times when whatever's on your mind right now might not fit right. But TheblerRoss provides us an opportunity to try it and see what works. You don't ever have to get to commitment. And there's another beautiful thing about this model and about change. I can function in exploration. I can continue to be a good employee in exploration if committing to something is too much. And so try that on for size as well. See where that fits for you. There's another key thing, another key arrow on this chart I want to get to, and that's that bracket down the left-hand side that's connecting denial and resistance. And that has to do with our listening skills. So when we are in the neutral zone and we find ourselves in this transition curve, our listening skills are like shut down. They're destroyed. And so when we're on that left-hand side and we're in denial and we're in resistance, and let's say I'm in there and my leader, we'll talk about workplace change for now. My leader is explaining the new strategic plan. And they're doing lots of communication and they're sending out notices and emails and whatnot. But I'm in denial or I'm in resistance. My thinking and my listening is not helping me move into the green circle. My thinking and my listening is actually reinforcing my need for my blue square. And so what we need to, why that's significant for us is that, what are you listening for? When you're in this change, when you're in the transition, and you hear something that could help you move into exploration, but you're not ready to hear it, what do we do with that? What are we actually listening for? And typically what we're listening for when we're in denial and resistance is we're listening for things to justify the way we feel. So if I'm in resistance and I'm really focused on my loss, I'm hearing things in that new strategic plan, or I'm hearing things in the communication that tell me why this is never going to work. And then I might have those dialogues with my colleagues. You know, this change is never going to work out. It's never going to happen. It's never going to work. And there's likely, maybe part of that's true. Maybe that whole green circle that sounds beautiful in the strategic plan will change next year because it didn't quite work. We don't know yet. But the focus is on the things that won't work. So why I'm bringing that up is because if you find yourself moving into exploration, go back and reread stuff that you think you already know. Reread the messages you got. Go back to emails. Even reach out to your leader and say, that meeting we had a few weeks ago, I don't know, I'm feeling like I need to revisit some of those topics. Can we have a conversation? Because your listening is now going to be different. And that is one of the most important things we can do for ourselves is recognize when I need to go back and read something again. And I need to go back and listen again. And if you're a leader listening to this, keep that in mind as well. Because if you're communicating a message and you've sent out the emails, you've done the team meetings, you've put everything on a portal, you've done everything you think you possibly could for communication. And then 3 weeks later, one of your employees comes to you and says, yeah, can you tell me about that strategic plan? And you're like, oh my gosh, I've done that 18 times. Do it 19. Do it 19, because now they're asking. And when they were in denial and in resistance and you shared your strategic plan, they didn't hear it. If you have an employee come to you and say, yeah, that meeting, I wasn't listening. I'm listening now, I'm ready, I'm listening now. Can you please do me a favor and see that as a positive sign? And don't focus on the fact that they were not listening in your meeting 2 weeks ago. Focus on the fact that they're ready to listen now. Because there's nothing worse for someone who has done the work, right? Done the self-evaluation, done the work, tried to move into exploration, gone to their leader to ask for help. And the leader said, I've already done that. I've already had this conversation. I'm not repeating myself again. That snake and ladder trail back to resistance is super slippery. And if someone's trying to get into exploration and they don't feel supported, whoop, right back over there, right back into resistance. So it goes both ways. Leaders listening and watching and supporting your teams moving through the curve. And then us as employees supporting ourselves through the curve by rereading content, by asking questions, by becoming inquisitive. Becoming inquisitive. And again, I don't know what change you're picturing right now for yourself, so that might be a big ask. But if it's not a big ask, if you see a slight difference that it might make if you were to just become inquisitive, then you owe it to yourself to give it a try. So the other thing we want to think about here too is this idea of continuous change. And then we're going to see how we might want to tie all three of these ideas together. But I would really love to introduce this before our time is up. So this idea of VUCA, and VUCA is an acronym and it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And what we know about VUCA, so the acronym came from the military and it described their environment. So a military environment, very volatile, very uncertain, very complex, extremely ambiguous. And that's where it originated. But then some really interesting leadership gurus took it and now apply it to change management. And so one of the questions that came in on the registration was about this idea of how do I really work through change that is constant? It feels like it's never over. And when we look at Bridges' model, it does give this false assumption that when I get to that green circle, things are going to feel better. It's going to calm down, change is over. And we know that's actually not true, that we are in a VUCA environment. we are living in a space of constant change. And this was true prior to the pandemic, even more so now. Wouldn't you say the whole world has been living in VUCA for almost 2 years? We live in a very volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous state at all times. And what does that feel like? And what can I do about it? So I've taken these little clips. You'll see it's like, it looks like a little cartoon. There's a little video on YouTube about VUCA, and I borrowed just these images from it because I think they speak very well to what VUCA feels like. And they refer to this feeling like you're living in a swamp, but I used to live on high ground. I used to live on solid ground with nice trees, and I could see the sun. And in VUCA, it feels like I'm just always falling down, and I'm always in this swamp, and it's dark, and I don't know which way to go. And I think I'm stepping on rock, but it turns out to be a turtle, and then it disappears into the swamp, and now I'm drowning. And it can feel like that when we are living in this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous state. And so luckily, we also have an anti-VUCA, a way to help us work in this environment. And of course, I'm just introducing these concepts. This whole idea of VUCA, we could talk about for hours and hours and hours and hours. But I feel that it's even helpful to even know it exists, because once again, in change, one of the most important things we can do for ourselves is recognize the normalcy of our feelings, because it can be tempting to assume that I am the only one feeling stress and anxiety from this change, and everybody else looks like they're handling it just fine. Why am I the only one up all night long and chewing my fingernails? Why am I the only one? And you're certainly not. And knowing that VUCA is part of our normal everyday life is even just that is useful. But let me share a couple more clips from the video just so that we can see what they suggest. So this is another point. And notice on the left-hand side, we've got this high ground. And it looks like it's a goal. Doesn't it look like, oh, the high ground? And we've got our little people over here in the swamp, and they've got their question marks. One guy's got his binoculars out, but I'm not sure if they're working. It's hard to tell. And they're all stuck in there with, oh, where do we go from here? So what this little part of the video was helping us understand was that, and here's the piece that we can grab onto, is that even when we're in VUCA, okay, even when we're in an environment that is uncertain, complex, ambiguous, constant, there can be moments of high ground. There, throughout our day, throughout our week, whatever it is for you, there are moments when the pressure of the change doesn't feel as heavy as it did 10 minutes ago. And that is true. That is a fact we can bank on, is that even in VUCA, there are moments when it doesn't feel as heavy as it did 10 minutes ago. And we refer to those as high ground. Times when I can just climb above all the chaos and catch my breath. And catch my breath, knowing I'm going to go back into the swamp. And that's the hard part about living in a VUCA space or living in the neutral zone, is that I can climb up, I can catch my breath, but I know that this isn't forever. I'm going to go back into the swamp. But what am I taking with me this time? If I'm in a swamp and I'm climbing through a swamp and it's like stinky and hot and dark and gross, and then I get to a high ground, that whole journey to get to that high ground is full of resiliency, full of resiliency. I'm still breathing. So when I get to the high ground, knowing that I'm going back into the swamp because I'm in VUCA, what am I going to do for myself while I'm on the high ground to collect all that resiliency that I just experienced? And I know that resiliency is one of those words that is overused in the last 2 years. It's the same as PPE. I swear, if you weren't in the medical environment prior to COVID, you did not know what PPE stood for. And now we all know what PPE stands for. And I feel like resiliency is the same. It's one of those words that now is overused, but please do not let it lose its value simply because the word is now, our kitchen table word. There is a lot of value in understanding what you're going through right now and the fact that you are going through it. Grab those bits of resiliency, because when you head back down into the swamp, you're not the same person you were before you got to that high ground. You're different. Bring something with you this time because you've been there before. So don't pretend that you haven't and start all over again. Take with you your resiliency and get back into that swamp. And then you'll move to the high ground again. So it's obviously a metaphor, but what your job is to do is to think about what is a high ground for you. What is something in your day, in your week, in your lunch hour, in 5 minutes, whatever. What is a high ground for you where if you could put yourself up on the top, take a breath, find resiliency, and then dive back in, what difference would that make for you? For me, my high ground is music. I do take a few minutes, especially if I'm having a super rough day, an overwhelming day, really busy, wearing lots of hats. I will literally find myself a few minutes and I'll just put my ear pods in and I'll listen to some classical music. And I pick that on purpose because I don't typically listen to classical music at the rest of my life. And so high grounds should be things that your brain notices is a bit different. So music itself, I adore. All my life is music. I got music playing all the time. But when I need a high ground, I pick music I don't listen to all the time. So my brain notices something's up. Other high grounds could be going for a walk. Other high grounds could be making a phone call to a best friend. Just be careful what conversations you have with that best friend, because sometimes best friends like to just encourage you, like, yeah, this sucks. And maybe that's a high ground for you. But remember what the point of the high ground is. The point of the high ground is to give you a chance to breathe, collect your resiliency before you head back in, because you know you are. And that's part of the acceptance. That's part of the movement from resistance into exploration. When we accept, high grounds take place, and so does the swamp. If we can find ourselves mentally in that space, we're already doing ourselves a favor by being able to participate that way. So I think now we can see these connections between the bridges model, where we've let go, but the new's not quite ready, and I'm in that neutral space. We've got TheblerRoss that can provide us with freedom to resist, and then a choice to move into exploration. And then we've got VUCA that reminds us that change is constant, and that feeling of pressure and overwhelm is not because you weren't prepared for the change. It's because the environment itself is creating pressure. So what we have to do is figure out how to function in that pressure. And it's a swamp and it's the high ground, but they both exist at the same time. And so with those three pieces, think about the change you're picturing. One of them will feel more supportive than the other, depending on what you're thinking of. There's going to be one or two key themes out of this conversation that will just pop it in your mind, let your brain sleep on it, and then see what you think about in the morning. See how your relationship to the change, see what you might notice about yourself. So thank you so much for having this conversation about change. I do hope you're able to take a couple things away. have that relationship with change, and view change and transition as an actionable process that we get to join in and participate in, even if we didn't ask for the change and even if we don't like it. So I'd love to open it up to questions if there's any for tonight. Ariana, you're totally on the spot there, because if you have any, I'm happy to help answer.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Laura.